Before I tell you my story, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like you were slowly being erased? Not with cruelty, but with silence. Replaced in your own family, spoken over, smiled past, left behind? Hi, my name is Margaret. I'm 78. And not long ago I was told, politely, that I wasn't needed anymore. Not in the kitchen, not at the table, not even in the stories being told around me. But I found a way to reclaim my voice. Quietly, firmly, and with a little help from the recipes that once held my life together. If you've ever felt underestimated, this story is for you. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below sharing where in the world you're watching from. I'd love to hear your story too. It was a Sunday, the kind that used to hum with the scent of rosemary and slow-cooked roast chicken. The kind of day my husband Harold and I would spend bustling around the kitchen together, teasing each other over gravy lumps and missing thyme sprigs. He'd sneak spoonfuls of my casserole while pretending to check for poison. I'd swat his hand and tell him I needed a food taster, not a thief. But Harold had been gone 6 years and Sundays had changed. Still, I held on to one ritual, cooking dinner for Daniel and Clare every month. It made the silence feel less permanent. That Sunday, I arrived early at their house with a bag of groceries in one hand and my mother's porcelain casserole dish in the other. I'd spent the morning trimming carrots, seasoning the chicken just right, and brushing the top crust with butter like my mother taught me. It wasn't just food, it was history, memory, care. Clare greeted me at the door, all smiles and soft tones. "Oh, Margaret, you shouldn't have." She leaned in for a kiss on the cheek, then gently plucked the dish from my hands before I'd stepped inside. "Why don't you sit today? You've done enough over the years." I blinked. "But I brought..." She waved it off. "We're trying something new today, quinoa with kale and roasted beets. Daniel's really into clean eating now." Daniel appeared in the hallway then, tugging on his sweater. He gave me a nod, not cold, but not warm either, and glanced at Clare with a small, knowing grin. "Clare's got it handled, Mom. You just relax." I tried to smile, tried to swallow the little lump in my throat that had nothing to do with food. I sat, hands folded, listening to the unfamiliar clatter of Clare's cookware in her pristine white kitchen. The smells were wrong. Lemon zest and apple cider vinegar instead of garlic and thyme. When we sat down to eat, Clare placed her salad-like creation at the center of the table, fussing over its presentation. My casserole, lukewarm by now, was pushed to the side in its foil. No one opened it. "Oh, this is lovely," Daniel said between bites. "So fresh." Clare beamed. "I figured we could lighten things up. I know Mom's dishes are comforting, but sometimes we all need to evolve a little, right?" I looked down at my plate, empty except for the spoonful of kale I'd reluctantly scooped. The casserole dish sat untouched, like a relic from a forgotten age. After dinner, I carried it back to the kitchen and peeled off the foil. The steam had long vanished. I spooned out a bite for myself, still tender, still flavorful. It tasted like home, like effort, like love. I was rinsing dishes when I heard it. Clare's voice, soft but clear from the dining room. She still thinks she's Gordon Ramsay. It's sweet, really. A pause. Daniel laughed. Let her have it. Cooking gives her something to do. Something to do. I stared down at my wrinkled hands, the soap bubbles clinging to my fingers like little ghosts. My late husband's wedding band was still on my finger. I suddenly felt foolish for wearing it every day, like a woman waiting to be useful again. That night, I returned to my quiet house and placed the untouched casserole in the fridge, even though I had no appetite. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, hands in my lap, eyes scanning the room we once filled with warmth and flour dust arguments. It wasn't about the food. It was never about the food. It was about being replaced, not with cruelty, but with indifference. That's what stung the most. No grand betrayal, just quiet dismissal, served cold. And for the first time in a long while, I felt old, but not broken. Something stirred inside me as I stared at the casserole dish. A flicker, a slow burning ember. They thought I was finished. They were wrong, Thiel. Weeks that followed were quiet in a way that scraped at the nerves. Not loud or cruel, just vacant. Silence had its own kind of volume when you weren't used to it. No Sunday invitation came. No gentle reminder about family lunch. I told myself they must be busy. Maybe Claire's work schedule shifted or Daniel had caught a cold. But even a cold used to come with a phone call. Instead, I found myself baking. Out of habit, more than hope. A peach pie, Harold's favorite, with crust edges pinched just so, the way my mother taught me when I was barely tall enough to reach the counter. I wrapped it in a clean towel, tucked it into my old wicker basket, and walked it over to their house one crisp morning. Claire answered the door, wearing a silky robe and holding a phone to her ear. She looked surprised to see me. Not rude, just as if I'd turned up without an appointment. "Oh," she said, sliding the phone down. "That's sweet of you. But we don't really do sugar anymore. We're on this anti-inflammatory thing. But thank you." She didn't take the basket inside. She just smiled, her hands wrapped tightly around her phone, and looked behind her, as if unsure what to do next. I stood there for a moment too long. "You could save it for Lily," I offered. Claire gave a little head tilt. "She's really cutting back, too. Braces, you know. Sugar's not great for that." Then she added softer, "Anyway, we have to go. We're late for Pilates." And just like that, the door gently clicked shut. I walked back home with the pie, still warm in the basket. When I set it on my kitchen table, I realized I hadn't made enough coffee to go with it. Or maybe I just hadn't thought I'd be eating it alone. That night, I opened my recipe journal, the one with grease-stained pages and little notes in the margins. "Use canned peaches if desperate. Harold won't notice," scribbled in fading blue ink. The spine was cracked but intact. I had meant to give it to Claire one day. Not anymore. Instead, it sat untouched beside my sewing kit and Harold's old watch. A little shrine to usefulness I no longer had. Days turned into weeks, and I noticed the group chat growing oddly quiet, until Lily accidentally mentioned a family dinner during a rushed phone call. Claire had taken over planning Daniel's 50th birthday. There were themes, apparently. Color palettes, reservations. My name never came up. When I asked about it, Lily hesitated. "Mom said you probably wouldn't want to deal with that many people," she said, and then added too quickly. "Besides, she said you tire easily now. You deserve rest." Deserve rest. It was a peculiar kind of prison, the one built from soft concern. The kind where the locks are made of politeness and the walls are thick with good intentions. I began to question things. Did my hands shake? More than I realized. Had I forgotten the timer last week or just imagined I did? I started buying pre-chopped onions instead of fresh ones. I flinched when the kettle hissed too loud. One afternoon, I stood in front of the mirror, pinning on my favorite amber brooch, the one Harold gave me for our 40th, and paused. I looked overdressed for a grocery run, silly even. I unclasped it and placed it back in the box. The next week, I stopped putting on blush altogether. Instead, I spent my mornings with the TV murmuring in the background, the sound low enough to ignore but loud enough to feel like someone was there. I took fewer walks, sat in the garden less. The roses were blooming, but I hadn't clipped any in days. Even the neighbor's cat stopped visiting. I must have seemed like a ghost, drifting from room to room. But the worst part? My voice. It had gotten quieter. I caught myself whispering thank you to the cashier, and didn't bother correcting her when she called me ma'am instead of my name. I used to joke, make little puns about canned goods or weather. Now I just nodded and paid. It wasn't grief this time. I had grieved before. When Harold passed. When my sister left the world before I could say goodbye. This was different. This was erasure, slow and sweet and disguised in smiles and well-meaning comments. Like being wrapped in a blanket until you couldn't move anymore. At night, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the room we once shared. Harold's reading chair still by the window, my knitting basket untouched, a half-finished scarf curling like ivy from the needles. I wasn't sad, not exactly. I was disappearing. And what frightened me more than death itself was the thought that no one seemed to notice. It was a Tuesday, bright, unseasonably warm. The kind of day that smells faintly of rosemary if you step outside with the right memories. I remember because I had spent the morning in my little kitchen, snipping herbs from the garden and folding dough over cinnamon-slicked apples. The crust cracked perfectly. Harold used to say my pies could heal a war wound. Clare was hosting another of her live-streamed wellness cook-alongs. I'd seen the flyers she posted online. Organic this, deconstructed that. Always filmed. In her kitchen. Always just her, smiling into the lens like it was a friend. I wasn't invited. But I came anyway. Not to intrude. I thought maybe she'd let me stand to the side. Maybe I could hand her a sprig of mint, offer a quiet nod of approval, or maybe I just missed being useful. I arrived mid-demo, the smell of something lemony drifting down the driveway. I knocked, waited, then let myself in with the key Daniel had insisted I keep for emergencies. The pie was warm, resting in a towel-lined basket. The herbs were bundled neatly, tied with kitchen string. I wore my good cardigan. Claire stood behind the island, lights set up, camera rolling. Daniel was filming, earbuds in, his back to the door. I cleared my throat gently. She turned, saw me, and her smile faltered for just a beat. Then she said, still facing the camera, "And look who dropped in, everyone. My mother-in-law, Margaret." Her voice rose to that cheerful pitch people use when trying to hide discomfort. I stepped forward with the pie. "I thought you might want—" Claire cut me off with a laugh. "She still thinks pie is a food group. Bless her." Laughter rippled through the live stream chat. I could hear the comments chiming in. Daniel said nothing. He didn't even turn the camera off me. He just shifted the angle so my face was no longer in frame. I stood there, heat rising in my cheeks, the pie growing heavier in my hands than it had been all morning. Claire walked over with a tight smile and stage whispered, "Why don't you sit down, Margaret? This one's for the modern home cook." Then to the camera, "We love a surprise visit, don't we?" More laughter. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough to feel every nerve in my spine prickling. Long enough to realize the pie was still untouched. Long enough to understand I had become a prop, something quaint, like a chipped teacup someone keeps on a shelf but never uses. I left without a word. The pie rode shotgun home with me. I didn't cry in the car, not until I pulled into my driveway. Then it came, sharp and uninvited, like a sudden downpour, the kind you can't prepare for. Inside, I placed the pie on the counter and stared at it. Perfect, untouched. Then I opened the drawer where Harold used to keep the camera batteries and pulled out an old Polaroid of us, taken the day we moved into our first home. We were standing in front of the kitchen, arms around each other, him holding a wooden spoon like a sword. We were laughing. We were proud. "You built me a kitchen," I whispered to the picture. "They've turned it into a stage." I sat in the dark for a long time. No TV, no music, just the slow ticking of the old wall clock and the sound of my own breathing. I felt small, irrelevant. Like an exhibit in a museum people passed by, politely without really seeing. But even in that silence, maybe because of it, something shifted, not rage, not bitterness, resolve. A small, sharp thought, clear as crystal. They hadn't seen the last of me. It began with dust. I was in the attic searching for a space heater when I spotted the old blue tin, tucked behind Harold's tool chest in a plastic bin of holiday lights. It was dented in the corner, the latch rusted just slightly. I hadn't touched it in years. The recipe box. I carried it downstairs like it was made of glass, cradled in both arms as if the weight of those index cards might shatter with mishandling. I set it on the kitchen table and opened the lid. Time spilled out. Little cards curled at the edges, smudged with gravy fingerprints, flour dust, and fading ink. Some were in my mother's handwriting, others mine, but most were in Harold's blocky print, done at my request when arthritis made the pen too cruel for my fingers. I pulled out one at random. Lemon Thyme Chicken, 1982. The corner was torn. A note on the back read, "Use the garden thyme, not store-bought. It tastes like soap otherwise." H.I. chuckled. He always had strong feelings about herbs. Beneath the recipes, something more fragile waited. Folded neatly, the edges yellowed but carefully kept. A letter, Harold's handwriting. "My dearest Maggie," it began. 50 years with you feels like 5, and 50 minutes without you would feel like a lifetime. You always brought people together, not just with food, but with your heart. Don't ever stop cooking. It's your gift. It's how you speak love. I see you, even when no one else does. Love always, H. I pressed the letter to my chest and let the tears come. Not loud, not desperate. Just slow, steady, like something loosening inside me. That same week, during coffee hour at church, Mrs. Grant mentioned a flyer she'd seen at the community center. A regional television station was holding a cooking contest for senior home chefs. Legacy Chef, it was called. I brushed it off with a smile. Oh, I don't know if I'd even remember how to hold my own on a camera, but the idea lodged itself in me, like a seed waiting for rain. That night, I placed Harold's letter next to the recipe box. I stared at it for a long time. It didn't feel like just a contest. It felt like something unfinished, something waiting. So, I began again. The first dish I made was a disaster. Oversalted stew and biscuits that came out like hockey pucks. My hands trembled when I kneaded the dough, and I burned the back of my arm on the oven rack. But I didn't stop. The next night, I tried again. Chicken pot pie with my old lattice crust. The smell alone was enough to stir something awake in me. By the end of the week, I had 3 meals cooling on the window ledge like I used to do when the kids were small. Mrs. Grant offered to be my taste tester, and my secret keeper. "You're better than half those YouTube cooks," she said between mouthfuls. "And you've got real soul in your food, not all this avocado foam nonsense." I laughed for the first time in weeks. A few days later, I asked around at church and was introduced to Ben, a retired cameraman who used to work for the local news. He was tall, with a cane and a soft spot for rhubarb. He agreed to film my submission in exchange for pie. "I don't do edits," he warned. "What we shoot is what they get." "That's fine," I told him. "I'm not looking to be fancy." We filmed in my kitchen. No lights, no makeup. Just me and my apron, the one with the embroidered spoon on the pocket, cooking the meals that had built my life. Pot roast, cornbread, pear crumble. Each recipe came with a story, and I told them, gently, not to perform, just to remember. We mailed the tape together at the post office. Then I waited. I didn't tell Daniel, or Claire, or even Lily. This was mine. Weeks passed. The days stretched like rising dough, slow, expectant. Every time the phone rang, my heart jumped a little. Until one afternoon, a cream-colored envelope arrived in the mail. Congratulations. It read, "You've been selected as a finalist for the Legacy Chef Showcase. Filming will begin in 4 weeks. Please arrive prepared with 2 dishes and a short personal story to accompany your presentation." I reread the letter 3 times before sitting down at the kitchen table. The sun was pouring through the curtains, catching dust motes mid-air like they were dancing. I ironed my apron that evening, careful with the corners, smoothing the cloth with more care than I'd given anything in years. Then I whispered, just loud enough for Harold, wherever he was, to hear me. "Modern cooks meet. Your roots." The studio lights were harsher than I expected. Cold and too bright, casting long shadows on the floor that made my hands look older than they ever had. They had asked me to arrive early, but I was still the last to walk on set. Everyone else buzzed with youth, producers in sneakers, camera operators in hoodies, a host with perfect teeth and a laugh that didn't quite touch her eyes. I stood quietly, adjusting my apron, the one with the spoon embroidery Harold had always admired. The edges were soft from decades of wear, but I had ironed it crisp that morning. I smoothed the fabric with trembling fingers. Not age, not fear, adrenaline. The judges sat at a long table, young and polished, blinking at tablets and styluses, not clipboards. I recognized one from television, a culinary influencer with over 1 million followers and a cookbook that looked more like a fashion magazine. I whispered to myself, "This isn't about them." My station was bare at first, just stainless steel and possibility. They told us to prepare 2 dishes, one savory, one sweet. I knew what I'd make before I even arrived. I didn't need notes or Pinterest boards. I brought memories. First, the stew. My mother's recipe, thick with root vegetables, tender, chunks of beef, and a splash of red wine that was always for the depth, she'd say. The scent filled the air quickly, cutting through the sterility of the studio like a hymn through static. Then came the tart. Summer peaches, just shy of too ripe, folded into a crust I made from scratch that morning. I sliced with care, listening to the judges whisper behind their clipboards. I caught only fragments, old-fashioned, simple, rustic. They didn't mean it kindly, but I kept going. The last dish was the war-era bread, the one with no eggs, no butter, just molasses and grit. My grandmother made it during rationing, and my mother taught me to treat every loaf like a statement of pride. I shaped the dough with slow reverence. Each fold, each pinch, felt like a memory passing through my hands. My fingers found strength I hadn't felt in years. During a break, I caught a glimpse of myself on the monitor, standing tall, hair pinned neatly, eyes clear and steady. My shoulders weren't hunched. My hands didn't tremble. I looked like my mother. Like the woman who raised 3 children on one income, who stitched her own curtains and made Sunday roast stretch through Tuesday. I belonged here. When the judging came, the room quieted. The first judge took a spoonful of stew, then paused. "This tastes like memory," he said softly, like something I forgot I missed. The peach tart was met with murmured approval. The bread? A surprised nod and the word, comfort. I didn't beam. I didn't clap for myself. I just folded my apron gently, stood with hands behind my back, and whispered, "Thank you, Mama." Behind the scenes, people started talking. Whispers trailed me like perfume. Unexpected, sleeper favorite, heart in her food. Ben, the retired cameraman who'd helped me with the submission video, had come to cheer me on. He patted my arm. "You've got them, Maggie. Just keep being you. The next day we returned for the semi-final results. I wore my brooch, the amber one, for luck. They announced the finalists with polished smiles, and just a touch too. Much suspense. I heard my name first. Applause. Smiles. Someone backstage handed me a bouquet that smelled like grocery store carnations. Then came the second name, Clare. Clare stood at the far end of the stage, wrapped in a soft mint green blazer, holding a quinoa bowl with edible flowers. She had entered as a wellness innovator, promoting anti-aging teas and gut-friendly fermented spreads. Her segment had been all aesthetic, overhead shots and plated spirals of cucumber. The irony struck like flint. I looked at her. She looked at me. No words were exchanged, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The finale was live. I could feel it in my chest. Not fear, not quite. More like the quiet hum of a storm far out to sea. I stood at the edge of the stage while production assistants buzzed past, all headsets and clipboards, the scent of hairspray clinging to the air like static. Clare was already there, polished and radiant, all pastel colors and smooth skin, standing beneath the lights like she belonged in them. Her ingredients were arranged on gleaming trays, microgreens, ribbons of zucchini, lemon foam in a piping bag. Everything pristine. I wore Harold's apron. It still smelled faintly of bay leaves and tobacco, though I hadn't lit a pipe in the house since the day he passed. The fabric was soft with age, but the embroidered H&M still held strong across the chest. A gift from Lily, back when she was just learning to stitch. We were given 2 hours. Clare dove in immediately, all swift, calculated motions, narrating her steps with media-trained confidence. "This is a gluten-free bechamel," she explained to the camera, made with oat milk and cashew cream. I didn't speak, not at first. I began with a whole chicken, just like the one Harold used to bring home from the Sunday farmer's market. I rubbed it gently with lemon zest, crushed rosemary, and a touch of olive oil. I slid it into the oven and began kneading the dough for my sourdough, the same one Daniel used to tear into with bare hands as a boy, too impatient to wait for a knife. The smell began to rise, rich and familiar. Somewhere in the audience I knew Daniel was sitting, maybe with Lily, maybe alone. I hadn't looked for him. I couldn't. Not yet. Claire's kale lasagna came together in perfect, layered precision. The cameraman circled her like a satellite, capturing every swipe of sauce and sprinkle of nutritional yeast. She smiled. She flourished. I simply cooked. When the time came to plate, I laid out Harold's serving platter, the one with the hairline crack shaped like a feather, and placed the roasted chicken in the center. Golden brown, skin crisp, scent nostalgic. I sliced the bread and arranged it alongside roasted carrots and sweet garlic. I looked up. The lights didn't feel as harsh anymore. The judges walked toward our tables. Claire's was first. She introduced her dish with the usual charm, speaking of anti-inflammatory benefits and guilt-free indulgence. They nodded politely, tasted, scribbled notes. Then they reached mine. I said only this: lemon rosemary chicken, rustic sourdough, no substitutions. They took a bite. Silence. Then one of them, the one who had called my stew memory, looked up and said, "This tastes like someone loved me." I didn't smile. I just bowed my head slightly and folded my hands. When the results were announced, there was a pause, just enough to let the suspense hang. Then they said my name. There was a beat of silence in the room. And then, applause. Real applause. Not polite or rehearsed, the kind that rises on its own, like bread left in the sun. I stepped forward, hands trembling, heart steady. The host handed me a modest crystal trophy. I could see my reflection in it, lines and all. Claire didn't move. Her jaw clenched. Her eyes searched mine, but I offered her nothing except a nod. I didn't need to win over her. I had won back myself. They asked if I'd like to say a few words. I held the mic close and said, calmly, clearly, for all the women who were told they were done before they were finished. The crowd roared, and for the first time since Harold died, I felt completely full. I looked out into the audience. Daniel was standing, clapping. His eyes glistened, his mouth parting in something like wonder. Our eyes met. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. The applause swelled, but in the middle of it, I heard one voice, softer than the rest, carried, not through microphones but memory. Never stop cooking, Maggie. It's your gift. It's strange how life circles back. 2 years had passed since the contest, and yet every time I tied my apron strings, I still felt that quiet electricity in my fingertips, the same hum I felt before I stepped onto that studio stage. But now, there were no bright lights, no judges, no scores, just me, my kitchen. A modest tripod and the camera Lily helped me set up. The channel is called Kitchen Classics. It started small, just a few videos showing how to make pot roast, thumbprint cookies, Harold's favorite omelet. I didn't fuss with graphics or music, just recipes, memories, and my voice, soft and steady, guiding viewers like an old friend sitting beside them. And to my surprise, people watched. Young chefs from cities I'd never visited wrote letters. My grandmother passed before she could teach me to cook, but watching you feels like learning from her. One girl from Montana sent me a photo of her first apple tart. Another from Ohio mailed me hand-sewn oven mitts. Some nights, I light a candle in the kitchen and reread the letters while the kettle hisses softly behind me. They feel like echoes, proof that something I thought was lost had only been waiting to be heard again. At the community center, I now run a little cooking club for seniors. We meet every Thursday. We don't just share recipes. We share laughter, tears, aches, triumphs. Last month, we catered a local school fundraiser. The children raved about the mac and cheese. Mrs. Grant cried. She said she hadn't felt needed in a decade. As for Claire, she never apologized. Not really. But she never mocked my food again. She still holds her wellness workshops, still takes pictures of avocado toast and matcha lattes. But now, she steps aside when I walk into the room. Sometimes silence is an apology. Daniel comes by more often. We don't talk about the past much. But he always asks, "What's cooking?" before he even sets down his keys. And Lily, well, she's blossomed. She's taken a liking to filming. She's the one behind the camera for most of my recent videos. She knows just how to frame the steam rising off a pot, how to zoom in when my hands shape dough with love. Last week, we filmed a new segment. I made a pie. The same one Claire once laughed at. As I pulled it from the oven, golden and bubbling, the kitchen filled with that warm, spiced scent of cinnamon and vanilla, Lily paused the camera, stepped forward, and leaned in close. "This smells like home," she said. And I knew she wasn't just talking about the pie. I handed her a fork. "You get the first bite." She smiled, her eyes soft. "Always did." I didn't need to say, "I told you so." The crust, the aroma, the silence between us, it all said enough. I had reclaimed more than just a table. I had reclaimed my voice, my worth, my joy, not with shouting. Not with vengeance, but with flour on my hands, love in my food, and the quiet dignity of never giving up who I was, even when the world tried to fold me away. And as I sat at that old wooden table, a pie cooling before me, laughter in the next, Room and the camera still rolling, I whispered to myself. This is the life I baked from scratch.